The village of Nyokabi, known to its people as Snake Land, rested peacefully beside the sacred river Olu, its waters shimmering under the golden African sun. The villagers lived in harmony with the land, their huts arranged in a wide circle around the great stone shrine of their protector, the snake god Sanaa. It was said that Sanaa had blessed Nyokabi generations ago, weaving his magic into the earth so that the soil remained fertile, the rains came in abundance, and serpents slithered freely without fear, for they were sacred. The people honored them, leaving offerings of milk and honey at the riverbank, whispering prayers for health and prosperity. Among the villagers was a young woman named Ada, whose voice was as sweet as the morning bird song. She was known not only for her beauty, her dark skin glowing like polished ebony, her eyes bright with kindness, but also for her gentle spirit. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she would walk to the riverbank and sing, her melodies drifting over the water like a soft breeze. The villagers believed her songs pleased Sanaa, for whenever she sang, the river seemed to ripple in quiet delight, and the serpents coiled near the shore as if listening. One night, when the moon hung heavy and silver in the sky, Ada sang a new song, one of longing and quiet dreams. As her voice carried over the water, something extraordinary happened. The river's surface shimmered, and from its depths emerged a serpent unlike any other. Its scales glowed with an unearthly light, shifting between emerald green and deep gold. Ada froze, her breath catching, but she did not run. The serpent lifted its head, its dark eyes locking onto hers, and in that moment, she felt no fear, only wonder. The creature was Sanaa himself, the great god who had watched over Nyokabi for centuries. He had heard her songs many times before, hidden in the reeds or beneath the water's surface, but tonight, something stirred within him. Gods were not meant to feel the pull of mortal hearts. This was the law of the great sky spirit, the ruler of all divine beings. To love a human was forbidden, punishable by divine wrath. Yet, as Sanaa listened to Ada's voice, so full of warmth and life, he found himself drifting closer, enchanted. That night, as Ada finished her song, the great serpent did not vanish back into the river. Instead, he lingered, his glowing body casting soft light upon her face. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and when they brushed against his scales, they were warm, not cold like other snakes. A silent understanding passed between them, one that would change everything. Unbeknownst to Ada, the other gods had seen this forbidden meeting. High above in the spirit realm, Kofi, the storm god, clenched his fists, his thunder rumbling in warning. Aya, the sun goddess, narrowed her fiery eyes. The balance between gods and mortals was delicate, and Sanaa's fascination with the girl threatened to unravel it. But for now, the snake god remained by the river, listening as Ada sang once more, unaware that their fates were already entwined, and that the gods would not allow such love to exist without consequence. The village slept peacefully that night, the air filled with the hum of crickets and the distant call of night birds. But deep in the heart of the sacred river, something ancient had awakened, and nothing would ever be the same again. The nights grew longer after Sanaa first revealed himself to Ada by the riverbank. What began as silent admiration soon blossomed into something deeper, something dangerous. One evening, as the fireflies danced over the water's surface, the great serpent did not appear in his scaled form. Instead, the reeds parted, and a man emerged, tall and regal, his skin kissed by the same golden light that had once shimmered across Sanaa's serpent body. His eyes, bright and unblinking like a snake's, locked onto Ada's, and though his form was now human, she knew him instantly. "You came back," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. Sanaa stepped forward, the moonlight tracing the sharp angles of his face. "I could not stay away," he admitted, his voice smooth yet carrying the weight of centuries. From that night on, they met in secret beneath the ancient baobab tree at the river's edge, where the villagers never wandered after dark. Ada brought him fruits from her family's harvest, and in return, Sanaa wove stories of the spirit world, tales of gods who shaped the mountains and rivers, of the great sky spirit who ruled them all. But there was one story he never told, the law that forbade gods from loving mortals. He could not bring himself to speak it, not when Ada's laughter filled the emptiness he had carried for so long. But the other gods were watching. Kofi, the storm god, had seen their first meeting from his throne in the thunderclouds. His anger crackled like lightning across the sky, for he was the enforcer of divine law. One evening, as Sanaa and Ada sat entwined beneath the stars, the wind howled suddenly, and the clouds split open. Kofi descended in a whirl of dark fury, his massive form crackling with energy. "You disgrace the laws of our kind," Kofi's voice boomed, shaking the earth. "A god does not lower himself to love a mortal." Sanaa stood, shielding Ada with his body. "What harm does it bring?" he challenged. "She is no threat to the balance. The law is the law." Kofi's eyes flashed white. "End this, or face the consequences." Sanaa's jaw tightened. "I refuse." Kofi's roar of fury sent birds scattering from the trees. With a final glare, he vanished into the storm, leaving behind a warning that hung heavy in the air. Ada trembled, her hands clutching Sanaa's. "What have we done?" He pulled her close. "Nothing wrong," he murmured. But even as he said it, he knew the gods would not let this stand. Weeks passed, and Ada's belly began to swell. The village women whispered behind their hands, for no man had claimed her, yet she carried a child. Some said it was a blessing, others a curse. But Ada knew the truth. Her baby was Sanaa's, a child born of divine love. When Kofi learned of the pregnancy, his wrath was unstoppable. He summoned Aya, the sun goddess, whose golden radiance burned with judgment. "He has broken the oldest law," Aya declared, her voice like scorching wind. "He must be punished." Kofi nodded grimly. "The snake god will fall." And so, beneath a sky stained blood-red by Aya's fury, the gods made their decree. Sanaa's love for Ada would be his end. The morning the gods came for Sanaa, the sky turned the color of burnt copper, and the air hummed with an eerie silence. The villagers of Nyokabi, sensing the shift in the wind, huddled inside their huts, whispering prayers to spirits they feared had already abandoned them. Ada stood by the riverbank, her hands pressed against her swollen belly, her heart pounding like a drum. She knew what was coming. Sanaa had warned her the night before, his voice heavy with sorrow. "They will not let this stand," he had murmured, his golden eyes dimmed by resignation. "But no matter what happens, our child will live. And they will be extraordinary." Before she could beg him to flee, to take her far from Nyokabi where the gods might never find them, the earth trembled. The river, once calm and glistening, churned violently, its waters hissing as though boiling from within. Then, from the blood-red sky, Kofi descended, his massive form wreathed in storm clouds, his eyes flashing with lightning. Aya followed, her radiance so searing that the grass at her feet blackened and curled. "Sanaa of the serpent scales," Kofi boomed, his voice shaking the trees. "You have defied the sacred law. For this, you will be cast down." Sanaa stepped forward, his human form melting away until he stood in his true glory, a colossal serpent, his emerald and gold scales gleaming even in the shadow of the gods. He did not cower. "I do not regret my love," he said, his voice steady, "and I will not beg for mercy." Aya lifted her hand, and a beam of molten sunlight struck Sanaa's body. He writhed, his scales blistering, but he did not cry out. Kofi raised his fist, and a bolt of lightning split the sky, piercing Sanaa's heart. Ada screamed, stumbling forward, but the force of the god's power threw her back. She could only watch in horror as Sanaa's great form stiffened, his flesh hardening, his brilliance fading, until where the mighty snake god had once stood, there was only a stone statue, its serpentine face frozen in an eternal snarl. The moment Sanaa's spirit left the world, the curse took hold. The river Olu, which had flowed faithfully for generations, gurgled once, then stilled. The water receded, leaving behind cracked mud and dying fish. The snakes, Nyokabi's sacred protectors, slithered away in unison, vanishing into the earth as though summoned by some unseen force. By nightfall, the first child fell ill, her skin burning with fever. Then another. The crops withered in the fields. The wells ran dry. The villagers, desperate for answers, turned to their elders, who pointed trembling fingers at Ada. "She brought this upon us," they hissed. "Her union with the serpent god has angered the heavens. The gods punish us for her sin." A mob formed at dawn, their faces twisted in fear and fury. They dragged Ada from her hut, their voices overlapping in accusations. She clutched her belly, her tears cutting paths through the dust on her cheeks. "Please," she begged. "My child is innocent." "Your child is cursed," spat an elder, thrusting a bony finger toward the forest. "Leave and do not return. Perhaps then the gods will forgive Nyokabi." With nothing but the clothes on her back, Ada was cast out, stumbling into the dense thicket beyond the village. The forest, usually alive with the chatter of monkeys and the rustle of birds, was silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Exhausted, Ada collapsed beneath a towering irako tree, her body racked with sobs. She had lost everything: her love, her home, her people. All she had left was the life growing inside her. Then a flicker of movement. From the roots of the tree, a small snake emerged, slender and silver-scaled, with eyes like polished onyx. It coiled near Ada's feet, its tongue flicking the air as if tasting her sorrow. She tensed, expecting it to strike, but instead, it nudged her hand gently. "You are not afraid of me?" she whispered. The snake, Zola, lifted its head as if understanding. Then, in a voice as soft as rustling leaves, it spoke. "I was his servant. Now I am yours." Ada gasped. You can talk?" "All serpents could once," Zola replied, slithering onto her lap, "before the curse took our voices. But I am bound to Sanaa's bloodline. Where you go, I will follow." A fragile hope kindled in Ada's chest. She was not entirely alone. As night fell, she curled on the forest floor, Zola coiled protectively around her wrist. In the distance, Nyokabi's fires burned dimly, a village now shrouded in suffering. But deep in the woods, something stirred, a child of God and mortal, waiting to be born. A child who would one day wield power beyond what the gods could imagine. And the gods, though they did not yet know it, had made a grave mistake. For curses, like rivers, do not flow forever. The forest swallowed Ada whole, its towering trees and thorny undergrowth closing around her like the jaws of some great beast. Days blurred into nights, each one longer and more desperate than the last. She survived on bitter roots and the occasional fruit Zola led her to, her belly growing heavier even as her body grew weaker. The little silver snake never left her side, his presence a fragile comfort in the suffocating loneliness. Sometimes, when the wind howled through the branches, Ada imagined it carried voices, the distant laughter of Nyokabi's children, the rhythmic pounding of mortar and pestle, Sanaa's whisper against her ear. But when she turned, there was only the endless green silence. Then came the storm. It began with a single drop of rain, cool against Ada's fevered skin. Then another, and another. Soon the skies split open, the rain falling in sheets so thick she could barely see her own hands. The contractions seized her without warning, sharp as a spear's tip. She crawled beneath the shelter of a massive fig tree, its roots twisting into a hollow just large enough for her to curl inside. Zola coiled around her wrist, his voice a steady hum in her ear as she gasped through the pain. "Breathe," he urged. "The child comes." And so, in the heart of the storm, with the earth trembling beneath her and the scent of wet soil thick in the air, Ada brought forth new life. The baby girl slipped into the world with a cry that seemed to shake the very leaves above them, a sound too powerful, too knowing, for something so small. Ada gathered her close, trembling fingers brushing over the child's face. Her skin was the rich brown of river clay, her cheeks round and soft. But it was her eyes that stole Ada's breath, slit-pupilled and gleaming gold, just like Sanaa's. Maji, Ada whispered, naming her for the water that had heralded her birth. The moment the word left her lips, the rain slowed, then stopped, as though the sky itself had paused to listen. But the peace was fleeting. Ada's strength ebbed with each passing hour. The trials of exile, of hunger and grief, had carved too deep. She cradled Maji against her chest, her voice fraying to a thread. "Listen to me, little one," she murmured. "You are your father's daughter. The gods fear what they do not understand, but you will make them see." The baby blinked up at her, those strange golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Ada pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Bring life back to Nyokabi." Her last breath left her as gently as a sigh, her body curling around Maji as though even in death, she could shield her. Zola slithered forward, his scales brushing Ada's still face before turning to the child. Maji's tiny fists clenched, and a single tear slipped free, streaking down her cheek and splashing onto the parched earth. Where it fell, the ground darkened. Then, impossibly, a trickle of water bubbled up, weaving through the dirt like a slender silver thread. The snake god's blood ran through her veins, and the world answered. Years passed. Maji grew like a sapling in the harshest soil, thin but unbreakable, her limbs toughened by the forest's demands. Zola was her constant shadow, his serpent's tongue flicking advice into her ear. He taught her the old words, the ones the snakes had spoken before the curse stole their voices. He showed her which roots could heal a fever, which berries could kill. And when the dry season came, when the earth cracked and the animals grew desperate, Maji learned the most dangerous lesson of all. Her tears could summon rain. The first time it happened, she was 6. She'd scraped her knee on a rock, the pain sharp and sudden. As she cried, the sky darkened, and a drizzle pattered against the leaves. By 10, she could call a downpour with nothing more than a sniffle. By 13, she understood the weight of what she carried, and why Zola warned her to never let the villagers. "They will fear you," he hissed one evening as they sheltered in a hollow tree. Lightning flickered in the distance, the air thick with the promise of a storm Maji had unconsciously summoned. Or worse, they will use you. Maji traced a finger over the cracked earth, watching as a single drop of her blood welled up, and the soil beneath it softened, turning damp. "But Nyokabi needs water," she said quietly. Mother said. "Your mother's words were both a blessing and a burden," Zola interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "When the time is right, we will return, but not yet." That time came on Maji's 16th birthday. She woke with Sanaa's voice in her dreams, low and resonant. "Daughter," it murmured, "the village is dying. Go." When she opened her eyes, Zola was already coiled at the mouth of their cave, his black eyes fixed on the path leading east, toward Nyokabi. "Today," was all he said. Maji packed what little she owned, a water skin, a knife fashioned from deer bone, a bracelet woven from river reeds, the only remnant of Ada she had left. Then, with Zola draped across her shoulders like a living shawl, she stepped out of the forest's embrace and into the sunlight. The land beyond was a wasteland. The riverbed yawned wide and empty, its banks crumbling to dust. The fields that had once fed Nyokabi were nothing but cracked earth, the skeletons of dead crops poking through like broken fingers. And the village itself, Maji's breath caught. Nyokabi's huts sagged under layers of dust, their thatched roofs caved in. The people who shuffled between them were shadows of what they must have once been, their ribs visible beneath sunken skin, their eyes hollow with hunger. A child crouched near the dry well, scraping at the dirt as though water might suddenly appear. Zola's tongue flicked against Maji's ear. "Now," he whispered, "show them who you are." Maji took a deep breath. Then she stepped forward, her golden eyes fixed on the village that had cast her mother out, the village she was born to save. The air in Nyokabi hung thick with dust and despair as Maji stepped into the village square, Zola coiled around her wrist like a living bracelet. The villagers froze mid-motion, women carrying empty water pots, men with sunken cheeks staring blankly at the cracked earth, all turning as one to gape at the stranger in their midst. Whispers slithered through the crowd like frightened snakes. Look at her eyes, just like the serpent gods. That's Ada's child, the cursed one. A rock flew from the crowd, striking Maji's shoulder. She flinched but stood firm, her chin lifted high. Then a wail cut through the tension. A young mother pushed forward, her skeletal arms clutching a limp child. "Please," the woman rasped, her voice raw with days of screaming. "My daughter." "She won't wake." Maji moved without hesitation. She knelt beside the child, her fingers brushing the girl's parched lips. The villagers held their breath as Maji cupped her hands, and from nowhere, water pooled in her palms, clear and cool and impossibly abundant. She trickled it into the child's mouth. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the girl coughed, her eyelids fluttering open. A gasp rippled through Nyokabi. The mother sobbed, clutching her revived child. "How?" Maji rose, water still dripping from her fingertips. "Take me to the river." The dried riverbed was a scar across the land, its banks crumbling to dust. At its center stood the stone statue of Sanaa, half buried in the dirt, his serpent face frozen in eternal defiance. Maji's breath hitched. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, meeting the father she'd never known, but the reality was a knife to her ribs. Zola slid down her arm, hissing softly. The curse began here. It must end here. Maji pressed her palm to the statue's chest. Nothing. No heartbeat, no warmth, just cold, dead stone. Her vision blurred. The first tear fell with a quiet plink against the statue's base. Then another. And another. "I never got to hear your voice," she whispered, "but I'll make them remember you." As her tears struck the stone, they didn't vanish. They sank in, like rain into thirsty soil. A crack splintered up the statue's torso. Golden light seeped through the fissures. Then, freedom. The statue exploded in a shower of gravel, and from the debris rose a swirling mist, glowing with the same emerald and gold light as Sanaa's scales had once shone. It coiled around Maji, warm as an embrace, and for the first time in 16 years, she heard her father's voice. Maji. The mist surged upward, then plunged into the riverbed. The earth trembled. A gurgling sound bubbled up from the depths, then a roar as the Olu River burst back to life, water exploding from the ground in a glittering arc. It crashed over the banks, soaking the cheering villagers, reviving the shriveled crops, sending fish flopping onto the suddenly dammed shore. But the miracle wasn't finished. From the reeds, from the trees, from cracks in the earth, snakes came slithering, hundreds of them, their scales flashing like scattered jewels. They didn't bite. They bowed, their heads dipping toward Maji in unison before dispersing into the village, their hissing voices whispering, "The priestess has come." That night, for the first time in a generation, Nyokabi feasted. Fires crackled, drums pounded. The villagers, plump with renewed hope, danced until their feet bled, their laughter shaking the stars. And at the center of it all sat Maji, a crown of water lilies in her hair, Zola draped across her shoulders like a living stole. The elder who'd once banished Ada now knelt before her daughter, pressing a weathered hand to the damp earth. "Forgive us," he begged. Maji lifted him up. "The past drowned with the curse," she said, then louder for all to hear. "From this day, Nyokabi will never thirst again. But remember, the water gives life, and it can take it away." She clenched her fist. The river behind her rose in a towering wave before gently settling back down. A not-so-subtle reminder. As the new water priestess, Maji taught them to dig deeper wells, to channel the river's flow, to honor the snakes that slithered through their fields, keeping pests at bay. Under her guidance, Nyokabi didn't just survive. It thrived, its name spreading across the land as a place of miracles. And on quiet evenings, when the fireflies danced over the Olu River, villagers would swear they saw two figures reflected in the water, Maji standing tall, and the ghostly silhouette of a serpentine man with golden eyes, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder. The gods had tried to break Niokabi. Instead, they'd given it a legend.